hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Obviously, professional services is a very people-intensive business, and we're talking today about a lot of the trends in the industry right now that are really changing our approach to the kind of consultants we need. We've got generational differences. We've got companies changing the kind of projects we're doing. We certainly have some economic issues on the horizon, and we're going to talk about kind of creating a strategy moving forward on how to better really manage this modern services workforce. So looking at just some key numbers, when we think about potential recession, companies start really focusing on revenue, additional revenue sources, and profitable revenue. And if we just look at professional services from that angle, my guess is that we're going to see a lot of pressure on PS to up their revenue. So currently, on average, 26% of all revenue for B2B tech companies is coming from services, and more than half of that comes from professional services. And we're seeing that professional services revenue is growing faster than even product revenue. So, clearly we're seeing a lot of new takes on revenue, looking at value-added services and renewable services, a lot of interesting things going on. So it's definitely a lever that companies are interested in using to generate additional revenue. But, there is some potential issues with hiring on the horizon, and we just did a survey in July about the economic sentiment of our member companies, and while 51% of companies think that their headcount will continue to grow, 49% anticipate hiring freezes or even potential layoffs. And I can say that these numbers were fairly consistent over different revenue sizes. So companies from the very largest to the very smallest are looking at potentially doing some freezing in order to make sure that they're going to be profitable in the coming year. So professional services, which has been on a constant hiring binge for really the last decade, especially I know here in Silicon Valley, it may be a little harder to justify some of those resources. So we're going to talk about really some creative approaches to not only getting the most out of the resources you have, but some alternate paradigms to consider. So another wrinkle in this is generations. And, while I never want to generalize and say everybody in a certain generation all acts or thinks the same, there are a lot of commonalities that we see. And we completed a survey at the end of last year about generational attitudes toward various aspects of hiring and retention. And I just want to highlight a couple of data points, really looking at the oldest workers, the baby boomers, and the youngest workers, the Gen Z, and there are some significant differences. This question asks how long they plan to stay at their current company, and no surprise, 70% of baby boomers say indefinitely, but when we look at Gen Z, 46%, 3 to 5 years, 27%, 1 to 2 years. So you can't assume that the employees you're hiring are going to be with you a very long time because that just may not be their perception. And another angle of this is looking at what's important to employees, and we gave them a bunch of different aspects of a work environment and asked to rate how important they were. And I won't go into the details. You can read the survey results online, but there are some really big differences. And if you have some employee engagement programs that were created several years ago, if you have executives that are of an older generation driving some of these programs, it could be that you're a little out of touch with what the youngest workers are really looking for, and you've got to make sure that you're meeting their expectations and delivering the work experience that they want so they do stay around a while. You're investing a lot of money in hiring and training and getting them up to speed, and you want to keep them around a while. So if we're looking at not only how do we retain them, but how do we optimize your services workforce to get the most out of your employees that you can without burning them out. First we're looking at boosting retention rates, and we tend to see that companies that are investing in career pathing and mentoring and coaching tend to have better retention rates. And especially for younger workers, it's really helping them understand what their career path would be within the company. Maybe it's moving to another department longer term. So that if you're not doing that, it's something you should really consider. Another angle is time to competency. And, historically, we would bring in a new consultant and put them in training 48 business days. That's, like 2.5 months before they were billable. And younger workers simply aren't willing to invest that much time. They want to hit the ground running. They want to feel like they're delivering value to their employer right away. So as we're really shifting the type of projects and doing more fixed price repeatable projects, identifying tasks that they can do with a little bit of training so they can start getting some experience and feel like they're delivering value is really helpful to them. And then definitely optimization, and this is where technology comes in, looking at how are we doing time tracking, streamlining, so it's really easy to capture more granular time tracking, understanding non-revenue activities, all of these things they're doing when they're not actually hitting their utilization numbers, and trying to better understand what these activities are and can they be streamlined or eliminated. And finally, expanding utilization and project allocation tracking. These are capabilities in your professional services automation platform that not everyone is really taking a lot of advantage of. And the more data we can get, the more you're going to be able to really up those utilization numbers. And the final thing I wanted to touch on is resource forecasting. And this is something else that your professional services automation or PSA platform can do, but we don't see a lot of companies really taking advantage of it. You're worried about forecasting revenue, but not necessarily looking at what sort of skills or experiences will we be needing 6, 12, even 18 months down the road. And we're in a great time of flux right now. Companies are introducing new products. You're going after new geographies. Who knows, where you may find some additional revenue sources, and all of this is going to change the type of skills and experience and certifications that you're going to need down the road. So the more you can up your game on this resource forecasting, by looking in the crystal ball and understanding what resources you need in the future, it gives you enough time to plan and leverage some of the more creative approaches that we're going to be talking about today. Well, I'd like to bring into the conversation one of my favorite co-presenters. Charles Gustine is the brand evangelist from Kantata. Welcome, Charles. Good to see you again.
Thank you, John. All right, so I'm really excited to be here. I want to kick off by building right off what John just said, which is I want to kick off by showing a glimpse of what resource forecasting looks like in the Kantata Cloud for Professional Services. These are just some of the components. And I want to do that partly to illustrate that the solutions at the vanguard of professional services technology are already presenting decision makers with the view that they need of upcoming demand and where hiring and training needs are emerging. But also, I want to do it to illustrate that when it comes to staying ahead of the changing dynamics of the services workforce and ahead of the curve of fluctuating demand, seeing is not always the same thing as believing. With the way that solutions like Kantata can integrate with or embed in leading CRM solutions like Salesforce, the comprehensive visibility into what lies ahead is there. You can see the road ahead. You can see the signals that you need to accelerate, or you need to hit the brakes, or you need to make a hard turn. But institutionally, we're not always in the best position to turn that data into action, proactive, ahead of the curve, giving us enough runway to deal with change and eliminate disruption to our business and our clients' business. Like we've all been there, right? We've been burned by forecasts that are true according to what's currently being reflected across our systems. We've wondered whether we can actually trust what our capacity and demand reports are telling us enough to pull the trigger early enough to onboard resources that it seems like we might need if this is actually accurate. But is it accurate? And while we're waiting for that confidence to build, which might be until the deal is won, we find that we're no longer ahead of the curve. Right now, we're behind the curve. We're now playing catch up, and it's an endless cycle of reaction. And this isn't just about tools. though tools are a big part of it. This is about culture and disciplines that need to be instituted around those tools in order to make sure people have the clarity, the confidence, and the control that they need to act on this data and stay ahead of that fluctuating demand and stay ahead of the changing dynamics of the workforce. Now, this isn't just anecdotal. I'm actually today going to present findings from recent research that we've conducted at Kantata into workforce dynamics to dovetail with some of the TSIA research that John just presented. So in June 2022, we surveyed 1,502 leaders, employees, and independent contractors in the services industry. Pretty even split between those three constituencies. So 502 senior leaders, 500 non-senior full-time employees, and 500 independent contractors. And we'll get into what the FTEs and the contractors said in just a little bit. A lot of synergy with what John just shared. But I wanted to start by looking at what the senior leaders said their days were like. 61% of senior leadership said that they spend at least a third of their day trying to solve employee turnover issues. Now, let's actually up the ante. 42% say they spend at least half of their day dealing with those issues, more than half of the 4 hours they have in a given day, kind of behind the eight ball. Over half of senior leadership admit they're having problems hiring full-time employees. So put simply, right, leadership is spending too much time dealing with employee turnover, and it's not getting easier for them to find the right people. This isn't just impacting leaders' ability to staff projects with the right people in time to satisfy clients. It's keeping them from doing critical aspects of their jobs. All of their job is basically this hamster wheel of playing catch up on employee turnover. So looking at the flip side of this coin, what are FTEs and independent contractors saying? When we look at what they're saying, it becomes clear why it might be hard for hiring managers to get a read on the forces that are pulling key employees out of their orbit, and why it's challenging to bring new talent into that orbit. One dimension of that is the way that I feel like we've tended to think about the Great Resignation as a culture, which is kind of one-dimensional. Pent-up demand is to move after staying put, for the year 2020 where we all stayed put. Sure, there's that. There's the empowerment to demand more flexibility, more benefits, more money. So, the classic perception, I think, is a headhunter comes calling, and now one of your key resources is working for a competitor that can pay them more or promise them more. For all the reasons John outlined, the recession is probably curbing some of this, but there's still a ton of employee movement, and there will continue to be. Now, here's the thing, looking at the macro level. This movement is not just one way, up a ladder from one higher paying full-time role to another. For a lot of people, like the 76% of independent contractors we surveyed who said that they were full-time employees only a year ago, that move is lateral into the contractor workforce. The other data points on here push back on something that I think our minds instinctively go to when we hear about that shift to the contractor workforce. My mind certainly does. Okay, fine. A lot of these people are just doing contract work until they can do the thing they really want to do, which is get another full-time role. That, it seems clear here, is a very pre-2020 way of thinking about the dynamic between full-time work and contract work. 43% of full-time employees admit that they look at the freedoms that come with working as a contractor and they feel jealous. 43%. And yes, somehow the answer to all three of these questions are 43% by some statistical improbability. 43% of full-time employees say that the safety of a paycheck is the only thing keeping them from making the leap to contract work, which, yeah, I'll grant you, a significant barrier, one that will probably keep them around through the recession, but not an unbreakable certainty. And 43% of full-time employees are straight up just considering becoming freelancers or independent contractors. No equivocating. They are entertaining it. So to piggyback on some of the TSIA data that John just presented earlier, I wanted to take this to the generational level. How does that active consideration of becoming a freelancer or contractor break down across generations? Perhaps unsurprisingly, based on the employee movement data that John showed, we see a very similar breakdown here. Boomers and Gen X are much less likely to consider making the leap from an FTE role to a contractor role. Millennials and Gen Z are both more likely than not to be considering a move to freelancer or contractor status. The majority of them are actually thinking about it. As millennials become the dominant force in the workforce, I say as a millennial, and as more and more Gen Z make their first entrance into the workforce, we kind of need to accept that this attitude will be sort of a default consideration for our workers rather than an exception. Now, I want to pause here before moving into how we deal with this strategically, John, and I want to chat with you about what alignment you're seeing between the two data sets, particularly around this breakdown in generational preferences?
Well, I think it's interesting how in sync the data is. So, when we talk about people not staying put in a job for, that long, as you say, it's not necessarily that they're jumping to another job. They are getting into the workforce, out of college, getting some really good experience, and then working in this gig approach, which is just really, really comfortable for younger generations. They're earlier in their career, their cost of living is a little bit lower. They can live any place in the country they want with a lower cost of living because of COVID and work from home. So I am not surprised by this data at all, and I think that really helps understand why people maybe be a little less committed to staying in their current company, because they're really looking at it as a way to get experience so they can start doing some contracting. But I also wanted to comment on one of your previous slides. I'm a little shocked that executives are spending that much time dealing with turnover, but it is logical, because I don't want to say that a worker shortage is not important to other departments, but in professional services, if you're short of consultants, you immediately create customer backlog, and customer backlog is a disaster. You're not following through on the promise to the customer, you're delaying adoption, you're delaying time to value, you're immediately putting renewals in danger. So the stakes are really high when you see, consultant positions going unfilled. So I had not seen that data. It's kind of eye-opening, but it completely makes sense.
And that's kind of what I want to transition into as we think about how we fight the rising tide, and really building off what you just said, right? I think this is something that professional services leaders don't classically feel empowered to tackle as an issue, because the idea of employee retention sits with HR and direct managers, but it directly impacts our ability to do what we need to do. So how do we start to put up a fight, right? And this whole fight the rising tide thing is a bit of a playful spin on us living in the age of the liquid workforce, right? Fluid, flexible workforce that's enabled to keep pace with constant change. And embracing that comes with all sorts of benefits, right? That's the future. It's actually the present. But one downside is that by virtue of it being liquid, the workforce is a lot harder for us to put our arms around, right? Because by nature, it's not solid, it's liquid. What I want to focus on is something this liquid workforce shares in common with bodies of water, like oceans. It has currents. We've already talked about some of them, right? These trends are actually currents in the workforce that are pulling and pushing workers out of their situation and into other situations. There are strong forces that's pulling the workforce out into the wider liquid workforce, so your workforce out into the ocean. Like a tide that's lapping closer and closer to the sandcastle that we've built on the beach, which is our company. These market forces are pulling our employees away, not just to other companies, but clearly into the contractor workforce, and they're threatening to erode the foundations of our business. So we can't just take this sitting down. The workforce may be more fluid, but our approach to retaining key talent needs to be solid, and it needs to be firm, because there are certain things we always need to do to remain successful. There are certain people in our talent network we cannot afford to lose to our competitors or to the allure of the contract workforce. And so we need to do everything in our power to fight that rising tide and hold on to the thing that makes our services organization special, our people. And this is not just, I know you hear people, right? This is not just an HR function. This is not just in the hands of direct managers. As services professionals who spend the lion's share of their time in the field, on projects, services leaders, resource managers, project managers play a really critical role in digging out and maintaining that moat that we build around our services sandcastle so that the tide is not able to lap our people away. So how do we do that? How do we build that moat? First, we need to see turnover issues before they happen. We can't wait till they're seen by HR. We need to see them. We're the people who are closest to the levers that can dictate whether someone is more or less likely to leave. So we need to be sure we're in a position to see those problems and prevent them, the problems that are going to keep us from holding on to the people that we can't afford to lose. This employee health and well-being dashboard that I'm showing here is something that we've built into the Kantata product. Anyone can use it, customize it to their needs. I want to talk for a moment about how it came about. In the early, very volatile days of the pandemic, I'm talking like month 1, month 2, month 3, one of our clients, Esri UK, actually configured this in their system on the bedrock of Kantata's robust resource management functionality using the inbuilt flexibility that our solution affords. So they went and they kind of customized this. They realized that a critical thing that they were going to need to do that they weren't necessarily equipped to do, and they hadn't really, most of us haven't necessarily put a premium on doing before, was monitoring the macro and micro trends in their workforce pertaining to employee health and well-being. So this dashboard accounts for a number of things, not just utilization rate. I think burnout, we classically think of it as a utilization number. Burnout is not just a utilization number. It's looking at a number of factors that account for a resource's ongoing comfort and happiness in their role, including the number of projects they're working on, whether they're taking their holiday or not, the mix of billable work with other activities like training, and more. And it flags leaders to resources that might be at risk of burning out, or the flip side of that, which is stagnating, feeling like they're not moving, they're cold. And it helps you do one of the most important things that a services business can do. It ensures you're able to retain top talent and have them available for the assignments that make the most sense for their skill set, that you are continually addressing your backlog. So when Esri UK told us about this, we loved it. We thought, this is genius, and we really quickly worked to build a version of this dashboard that we could roll out to the wider Kantata audience, which is what we're looking at here, something that is available for people to use across the Kantata client base. So part of what's so great about this is that it does prompt businesses to take actions that go beyond balancing utilization, which I'll grant, absolutely essential for countless reasons. But that when it comes to building true loyalty among our key talent is kind of a basic hygiene activity. There's so much more we need to do to build that moat around our resources beyond the sort of Goldilocks question of giving each person not too much work, not too little work, but just the right amount of work for their work-life balance. One key data point in our upcoming report from the research that we did focuses on something that John emphasized earlier. Those 75% of companies that John mentioned are providing career pathing for consultants, the 68% that offer a formal mentoring or coaching program, that is appreciated. 92% of our surveyed full-time employees say they are going to be more loyal to companies that invest in their professional growth by paying for perks, like certifications, like continuing education programs, like master classes. And 93% of senior leadership are on the same page. In their estimation, structured professional development opportunities should absolutely be a core element of overall benefits provided. Now we get to the catch. Employees want it, senior leadership believe it's essential, but not all employees are seeing the net results of that agreement. A third of full-time employees say they are either not sure or they really don't believe that their senior leadership actually prioritizes employee growth. So this is one of the key areas where we're continuing to innovate in the Kantata Cloud. We're spurred on by our clients here. They are asking us for ways to use technology to make clear how much of a priority professional services development pathways are at their business. And this has taken the form of a number of features that contribute to an organization's ability to truly shape professional growth pathways for professional services employees and make those employees critically feel empowered to contribute. That feeling is what breeds loyalty. So for example, what we're seeing on the screen here, one of the big asks we got when it came to shifting the resource conversation towards professional growth pathways was the ability to have employees be able to put their hands up, raise their hand for assignments that interest them. And that led to the concept of role searches, where you, as the services decision maker, decide which open roles you want to publish out to your workforce. And critically, you specify which parts of your workforce you want to be able to see those roles. It's not just a blanket thing. And then every user out there has the ability to create these filters that show them different role searches that might appeal to them. So a project manager in Boston, which is where I am, might have searches running for open project manager roles, open roles in Boston, and actually open data analyst roles, because that's actually one of their aspirations, and they've been doing certifications that qualify them for those roles. So they're looking for interesting data analyst roles that they might be able to get their foot in the door on. Now, when they go in and look at published roles, they can actually communicate their preferences. They can give a thumbs up for a role that they want. They can give a star for their favorite roles, thumbs down for roles that actually I don't think I'm right for. So now when you are evaluating your options for a role, you're not just looking at who is available and what they cost. You're looking at who thinks this role might be the next step in their career. an important decision-making factor, I think. So to go alongside that, we also provide the ability to not just see and update your skills as an employee, but also to communicate learning objectives and to build skills plans with your manager so that you can work collaboratively to see those learning objectives and how they're building over time to become learned objectives, to become capabilities that you've built through your work as part of this company. These tools can be really invaluable to fostering a more engaged workforce, and a workforce that is more likely to see your business as a long-term option for their career rather than giving in to the forces that are trying to pull them away. So those are some key strategies to ensure we're in a position to retain our top talent, to fight that rising tide. Now I'm going to totally 180, right? Now let's talk about the flip side of the coin. The world is changing. No matter how hard you fight, you are not going to be able to reverse the course of market dynamics and turn back time. Your workforce will be hybrid, if not remote. They will be diffuse. There may be more reliance on contractors than before, and there may be more emphasis on needing to bring new people into the loop quickly and effectively because of high turnover. So a strategy that is dependent on you always having the right person for a task on staff and on you holding on to every person on your team is not a great strategy. It's a bad strategy. That has always been true, but it's truer than ever. Some of the best talent out there, the right people for the job, are part of the external workforce, and they want to be. As our data shows, more people than ever. So you need a technology strategy that aligns with trends in the liquid workforce and helps you go with the flow. You need to move where the current is taking you with these sorts of things. So a lot of senior leaders, when they hear that, are like, okay, check. I've got that. I've got a great technology strategy, and my organization is bought in on it. So let's look at the left-hand side of this data here, our predominant yellow circles. 92% of leadership say that they are going out of their way and seeking full-time employees' input on the tools that they need. And 87% think they've nailed it, right? They've implemented tools and changes that have made life for full-time employees and contractors alike more efficient, more effective. But tread carefully here. There is a gap between what senior leaders perceive and what employees and contractors believe. So 28% of full-time employees say their input is actually not being sought by senior leadership, which is a pretty sizable gap from the 92% of senior leaderships who say they've got this. The gap is less pronounced when it comes to tech and changes that are efficient and effective. So 16% of employees describe the tools their organization uses as outdated, which is still a high number, but there's still a gap there. But what I want to focus on in particular here, because we've already made clear how critical the contractor workforce is going forward, is how many more independent contractors, 21%, feel like they're using outdated tools. There's a gap there between what employees are using and what contractors are using. Now, before I move into how we're kind of dealing with this with Kantata, John, based on what you're seeing in the market, what are some of the reasons maybe you think this gap exists between what senior leadership perceives they're doing and what the workforce perceives is being done? And what are some of the steps to take to close that gap?
Well, Charles, I have to say I'm not surprised at this data at all. I do a lot of transformation workshop with TSIA members, and one of the things that I do at the beginning of the workshop is I survey executives and I survey employees. How well has the company really explained to employees why we're making these changes, what are the benefits for employees and customers, what are the revenue implications, et cetera. And in every case, executives 100% say we completely communicated everything. Everybody knows why we're transforming. And the employees, usually about the same numbers. We have no idea. This is being shoved down our throats. We're not involved in the planning. And there's a huge disconnect. And it's usually a couple of reasons. One is because of these generational differences, there's a big gap between what senior leaderships think is effective communication and what employees think is effective communication. They want FaceTime with the executive, and they're not getting that. And another common problem, not to blame middle management, but there's a lot of bogging down in middle management that executives are going to them and saying, are you getting input from employees? They say, oh yeah, we know what employees want, but they're not actually communicating with them. So the executives want to change and the employees want to change, but it gets bogged down in the middle with the people that actually have to do the transformation and drive the leadership. So, I think it's about active listening and understanding what communication means and actually getting face time between your senior executives and your youngest employees, because listen, they got a lot of friends working at your competitors and they all compare what tools they're using, and contractors are working with a dozen different companies, so they've got really good insight. So if they're telling you our tools are outdated, you probably should listen.
Right. And I want to build on that and really focus on the contractor part of that, which is, I mean, there's a sort of natural switch to this of like, well, take how disconnected employees feel from the input process and the tools they're using and magnify that for contractors. And it's like, well, of course, we're not going to spend as much time with our partners and our contractors and our freelancers communicating to them about how to effectively use the tools we're providing and get their input on what tools we should be using. They're our contractors, right? But everything that we've just talked about dictates that we are going to be reliant on not just contractors who you can bring in, but contractors who you understand and who understand you. There is a sense of loyalty there, and they are becoming increasingly critical, if they're not already critical, to helping us get the job done. And I think that this is one of the places, specifically focusing around how we invite external contractors in to actually be a part of our workforce and not a mystery, and we're not a mystery to them, where software providers can make one of the biggest impacts on the way the professional services operates. I think of all the businesses out there who are dependent on contractors and freelancers to get good work done, but who, when it actually comes to getting that work done, they don't have the tools and processes in place to actually support those contract workers in the same way they would an employee. I think of all the work that gets done over emails and spreadsheets and all the stuff that we are intentionally trying to engineer out of the process for our employees, but then in a team that is maybe partially or predominantly built off of contractors, we just lose all sense of that, and we're once again completely reliant on all of the things that keep us siloed, misinformed, and inefficient. So that is why Kantata has put so much emphasis into innovating our talent network operating, which provides some game-changing capabilities of not just understanding the people that make up your wider talent network, what their skills are, when are they available, things that can be major blind spots for organizations now, but also of taking the critical step of inviting those workers into the same platform where you are getting work done quickly, easily, efficiently, so that they are in the best position to help you accomplish your goals. So there's a few different aspects for this. What we're actually seeing here is our active external members, and you can see this checkbox here. Well, first of all, we're able to see their skills. You know, as we're working with a contractor or a partner, and we have that ability to kind of bring them into the loop, we can actually add that organization into our instance of Kantata, and it actually sets up an instance of Kantata for them. And, where we allow login for people, we're not just able to understand them for staffing reasons. So we're not just kind of looking at this person and going, okay, here's where we add them onto projects and here's what their availability is. But with the allow login, we're actually giving them the ability to, in their instance, let's say they work for Acme, right? And Acme is working with us, right? They have a drop-down menu where they can actually see the different businesses that they are partnering with, and they can jump into our portal, see the projects that they are assigned, and actually start working on those projects alongside us. And obviously, you have the ability here to control the permissions and control what they can actually do. But this is achieving two really important things. One, it is eliminating the barrier from understanding who your wider talent network is. And as you are doing things in Kantata, like working through Team Builder to really figure out who are the recommended resources, you're getting recommended full-time employees alongside contractors. It really is giving you an idea of who is the best person for this, who is available and who has the skills, regardless of whether they work for us or not. And you can obviously work through those recommendations and see other options, but you're getting those things surfaced. It's eliminating those blind spots, but also it is taking that critical step of eliminating the barrier that exists between how our employees get work done, which we invest a lot of time and money into, and we believe is the most effective way for us to work on projects and resourcing and get things accomplished for our clients, and making sure that our contractors have that same foot in the door and can do those things. So I really just wanted to kind of give a sense in that area, alongside some of the other areas that we talked about earlier, of where the innovation is happening, what clients are asking for as they're turning to solutions like Kantata. And it comes to this question of not just resource management as we've classically conceived of it, but a resource optimization engine that really deals with the changing market dynamics that we are all seeing, and that both of the data sets that we shared really back up. So for my last slide before we get to questions, I wanted to kind of actually turn it over to one of our clients and hear from them about this. Actually gets into, kind of turns away from the contractor thing a little bit and gets to one of the other aspects of Go with the Flow, which is something I brought up, which is, yeah, things are going to be hybrid. They're going to be remote. We are getting back to that place where some things are happening within the office now. But that notion, I mean, this is something that Kantata is doing. We're hiring anywhere in the globe where the person is. I think we've sort of opened the door to not necessarily limiting ourselves to what is capable within an office culture, because the technology has moved so far within these 2 years to make it so that find where the best people are and worry about how you get everyone on the same page without necessarily mandating that that has to be done in front of a whiteboard in the office. And so Esri, which actually is sort of different from Esri UK. Esri, Brad Johnson, Business Execution Department Manager at Esri, when we talked to him about what Kantata is helping them do, said, you know, we couldn't have done business the way we do it today without Kantata. Communication used to be really good locally, so right, within your hallway or your office, but communication globally wasn't there, right? Kantata has really driven that global communication. Increasingly important during the pandemic, weren't in the office, needed a tool we could use to collaborate. From a resourcing perspective, having Kantata has been huge. And this seems really minor, right? This last thing in the product is maybe not as mind-altering and groundbreaking as what we've seen before, but it's so significant because it really speaks to, you can do all the math in the world, but having a capability to actually say, when it comes to Rachel, to give someone the context when it comes to Rachel O'Neill with just a little rollover, info. Here's what Rachel's preferences are, right? Rachel has told us our preferences. If we don't have a way to carry over those preferences to you, the resource manager or the project manager who's making these decisions, then her preferences aren't going to be accounted for. She's going to be put on projects that don't align with her preferences. That happens frequently enough. Rachel's going to leave. Rachel works from home Monday and Friday. Her preferred location when she goes on site is London. She prefers shorter assignments close to home for October. And so having that information, we are in a better position to do what Brad Johnson at Esri here is talking about, which is really make decisions that maybe it was easy for us to make locally in the office when Rachel was right next to us, but in a world where not only does Rachel not necessarily work next to us, but maybe Rachel doesn't work for us. We are able to really understand what we need to do to keep our business successful and keep our people making our business successful. So that is all the slides that I have. I think we're ready for some questions now.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Charles. And then just as a reminder, if anybody would like to ask a question, please enter it in the Ask a Question box, and we'll get through as many questions as time allows. Our first question, since we have quite a few, I'm going to jump right in, is from April. And they ask, when it comes to skills, learning objectives, and skills plans, where does it make the most sense for ownership to sit between HR and PS and between systems like HCM and PSA?
John, I think I'll defer to you first on. We've talked about this. I know you have thoughts on this.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So a year ago, I interviewed a dozen companies about this exact topic. How are you doing skills management? How granular are you getting for resource assignments? And most companies say HR is taking care of it. But when you ask HR, they did remedial tracking of the skills the employee had when they were hired, it's never been updated. And I really think expecting HR to do this for you is a little lazy, because most departments don't need a granular skill assessment of every employee. But every time they complete a project successfully, their skills have changed. You know, every time they implement a product for the first time, their skills have changed. So, you know, if you want to get granular in doing this, you're going to have to track it yourself. And if you're assuming it's going to be done by the HR system or HCM system, that's not what it was designed for. So, you know, unless you're a company that, you know, does that as your, you know, business value, I think it's got to be PS and PSA. But what are you seeing, Charles? Are you seeing people doing it effectively in HR?
I think whether it's being done in HR or in the PSA, right? There's definitely more of an emphasis on integrating these two. So I think the question of ownership maybe becomes one of co-ownership, which I just don't think existed previously. And I think there's more of an impetus for it to exist now, in the same way that co-ownership materialized in natural connections between PSA and ERP, PSA and CRM. There's more of that need now as PS tries to take more ownership or co-ownership of this to really create those integration points between HCM and PSA, or find the natural places where PSA can own certain things that we've traditionally thought of as the provenance of HCM or talent management solutions, like skills taxonomies, like career pathing, which is the same with CRM and ERP. If it is reliant on an integration or a set of capabilities that can't talk to each other, then not only is it going to be time-consuming to manage, too time-consuming, but it's actually not going to be managed, right? Things are going to fall apart. Things will incline towards chaos, and you will start to build up these blind spots and data silos that make it so that actually you're not seeing an updated skills taxonomy anymore. You have no visibility into what career pathing is going on in those other systems. And so then PS is operating in just a total black hole of just putting people on projects without any real sense of what that has to do with what HR is looking over, which is how are our people doing, and are they going to stick around, and that sort of stuff.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time today. I know we still have quite a few questions we weren't able to answer live, but don't worry, we haven't forgotten about you, and we will make sure to follow up with you. And with that being said, a few quick reminders before we sign off for today. There will be an exit survey at the end of today's live webinar. If you could please take a few minutes to provide your feedback on the content and your experience by filling out that brief survey. And a link to the recorded version of today's webinar will be sent out within the next 24 hours. I'd now like to take this time to thank our presenters, John and Charles, for delivering an outstanding session. And thank you to everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's webinar, Staying Ahead of the Changing Dynamics of the Modern Services Workforce, brought to you by Technology and Services Industry Association and sponsored by Kantata. We look forward to seeing you at our next TSIA webinar. Take care, everyone.